Hello and welcome to Coaching Outside the Box Live. I'm Richard Shaw and this is Paul Mayers, and we're very happy to be here on our first live episode. And Paul, what we're going to be talking about today?
This week, excited to announce that we will be talking about coaches who overcomplicate things with young players. Massively prevalent issue, so I'm looking forward to talk about that.
Now, before we start, we must make it clear that, as always, there are people that just don't know any better because they might have just started getting involved in soccer and they might be coaching at the rec level and not have much experience and things like that. And we actually use an illustration to describe this. This is called the dark room scenario. And as you can see from the picture here, you know, there's a light switch on the wall. The information is there. They just don't know any better. And that is a case where you can't be critical. However, today, Paul, we're not talking about rec coaches or travel coaches. We're actually going to be talking about premier coaches.
Yeah, coaches who really should be knowing better. Coaches who have gone through the licensing. They've done courses. They've been to conventions. They work for often self-affirmed premier or leading clubs. So really, it's not the dark room effect for these guys. It's a little bit more than that because they actually should.
Yeah, they should know. They should know better, right?
They should know better.
All right, so let's get going here. You know, first and foremost, what do we mean by coaches overcomplicating it?
Basically, I mean, first of all, we're looking at activities, the training activities that coaches put on. Often they are elaborate, they are complex. They involve elaborate passing routines and drills, tactical elements, a lot of strategic thought going into the sessions, and really, you know, it doesn't meet the progressive needs for many kids. Many kids are technically not ready for it, cognitively not ready for it. Yet we just see it, you know, so consistently throughout the nation. At the younger age groups, coaches just overcomplicating the whole process.
Yeah, like through exercises, through drills. You know, so I mean, how often do you see it where a coach will be involved with maybe some 10 or 11-year-olds and they'll be setting up a drill where like there's cones all over the place and, you know, the coach will be trying to set it up and then he'll be like, all right, Jimmy, this is what you got to do. You receive the ball there, you need to play it over there to John and then follow your pass and then try and receive it again. Then you get a 1-2. But remember, after your little 1-2, you got to turn and check over here and then switch with the player in the red penny. So then that way the numbers are all sorted out and it's like, what's going on here?
You're using me, man.
But, you know, so it's that type of scenario, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that, you know, are wrong with that on so many levels.
Yeah.
First of all, you know, the one thing that a lot of people don't get, and again, you know, a lot of coaches just don't know, and that's fine, but these coaches should know better. We've got to keep saying that.
Yeah.
These drills, these complex drills are often isolated. What we mean by that, they're isolated. They're out of context of the game.
Right.
So soccer is a ever-changing environment. It's fast-paced, it's dynamic, and, you know, being behind cones in static, isolated activities is not really replicating the game demands. Something we speak about all the time when we visit clubs.
Yeah.
So you might get better, I'm just saying you might get better at that specific passing routine or that complicated drill that they're actually doing.
Yeah.
But does that transfer to being more astute, more intelligent players in the long term? Well, you know, the evidence and the empirical investigation out there, as we've highlighted time and time again, would suggest otherwise. You know, a lot of people, a lot of top people are now saying that, you know, these types of activities, these static, isolated drills that we see these self-proclaimed leading coaches do all the time, are actually not doing anything to help players in the long term.
And that's primarily because the number one important thing is the decision making, right?
It's decision making, and that's, you know, as we speak about in our book, Coaching Outside the Box, it is decision making which separates the most effective players from the not so effective players.
Yeah.
It's not physicality, it's not speed, it's not aggression, it's not, you know, other attributes. The thing that separates the top players. Now, this is elite development we're talking about. We've always got to be mindful of keep reining it in, and we're talking about young kids here, and we've got to retain their passion.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about becoming better soccer players, it's decision making
Yeah.
that separates.
So these repetitive exercises, which often involve just choreographed movements,
prescribed motions of play, and they don't incorporate any decision making. Any decision making, zero decision making.
Yeah.
And if you're exposed to that week after week, year after year, do you think you're going to be a more astute decision maker on the soccer field?
Yeah.
Well,
so in terms of the activities then, and I know we're going to touch on this in a bit, but it's like with decision making involved, those technical aspects that a coach might be doing it well. The reason why I'm setting up this exercise as it is because I'm focusing on technique and receiving the pass and passing it. But as we'll talk about shortly, and as we obviously go into in more depth in other things that we've discussed in the past, like those things can also be incorporated into activities that involve decision making. And and
we'll talk about that.
We'll talk about that in a bit.
Yeah,
now with that said, we talked about confusion, we talked about the complexity of it, but it's interesting because even though these activities are set up in such a complex manner for young players, we often see it breaking down.
Yeah.
And then it starts breaking down, and then not only do kids become a little bit maybe frustrated, but what we see more and more is the coaches getting frustrated and getting upset and getting angry because it's breaking down.
Yeah, absolutely, and because it starts breaking down, and I'm sure parents have seen this all over the nation again.
Yeah.
The coaches start becoming frustrated themselves. They start berating the kids. They start ridiculing. Sarcasm is a massive one that we always see.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there was a classic example of this at the convention a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
When there was a coach that was putting on obviously one of the demonstrations, and and as you often see, tons of coaches sat in the stand, all watching it, all making notes and things like that. And the coach he's trying to incorporate this pretty complex activity, and while I was watching it, I was actually watching it because we want to learn, you always want to see these things, and I was watching it, and I could see, I was like, this is pretty challenging for these kids, you know what I mean, because they're young and that, and I'm watching, and then I could tell it was going to break down because you could just see the kids weren't confident with what they're doing. They didn't know exactly what was happening, and it wasn't really explained that well, to be quite honest. But in typical fashion, it broke down.
Yeah.
And the kid, you could see, and keep in mind, there's tons of people watching, taking notes.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, this coach started absolutely berating the kid.
Yeah.
And being sarcastic.
Yeah.
And obviously, I think he was probably a little bit embarrassed because he probably felt like, oh, this is making me look a bit foolish here because he's not working.
Yeah.
But instead of just carrying on, he turns it to the kid. And it's not even the kid's fault.
Yeah.
Kid's a young lad.
Yeah.
And you could clearly see the kid was absolutely gutted.
Yeah.
You could see he felt bad.
Yeah.
And but that a lot of that stuff goes under the radar, man.
Absolutely.
Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. It goes under the radar, and it's it really is quite frightening now how it's allowed to go under the radar. But in terms of the activities, just going back to that, I've just been thinking, a couple of, 3 months ago, we went into that club, we did the workshop.
Yeah.
And what a lot of clubs do now in terms of overcomplicating it, overcooking it with young kids, is they start implementing like elaborate game models.
Yeah.
Now, there's certain elements might be okay in the game model that are applicable with young kids, but there are a lot of elements, a lot of aspects to the game model. That's just one example of game model.
Yeah.
That actually are not applicable with young kids at 11, 12, 13. And I remember, just going back to that workshop we were talking about, asking one of the coaches to provide a demonstration, provide an example of what we're talking about in terms of what they put on with their kids. And this game model, this particular game model of this time, incorporated a lot of strategic positional play, a lot of set plays, a lot of patterns of play, all these elaborate components of the game. And, kids have just stood there for 45, 50, 55 minutes, this particular session.
Of a practice,
Of one practice session. He's got pennies everywhere, this particular coach. Quite amusing, but it's actually not amusing for the kids. All the parents who are paying a lot of money for the privilege of allowing their kids to stand in a set position all night. And there was pennies everywhere. And he was trying to basically get positional play over to the kids. That, we're talking about 11-year-old boys and girls here. I mean, what's happening here,
Well, the red flag from that experience, and I know the one you're referring to, was when we first get to the club. One of the things we ask is, all right, what's your philosophy based on?
Yeah.
And to our surprise, they were kind of like, oh, it's this.
Yeah.
And they gave us the documentation of the game model, and we have to evaluate first and foremost. But then obviously after we watch that session, when we do our question and answer, not only with some of the coaches, we also do it with the parents, but most importantly, we did it with the kids.
Yeah.
And we pull them to the side and we explain to the kids, hey, listen, no one's going to know what you're saying.
Yeah.
This is in confidence. What did you enjoy most about that session? The kids were struggling to
elaborate any answer.
And even like, if you remember, what did you learn?
Yeah.
And did you enjoy it?
Yeah.
And it was minimal. It was like they were just kind of saying, well, I guess, we're trying to work on formations. They couldn't really explain anything they'd learned solid.
No.
And the enjoyment levels were obviously not there as well because of that.
Absolutely. So okay, I mean, we're talking about these elaborate drills, elaborate strategies that coaches are implementing with young kids that they're not ready for technically, cognitively. I'm not saying not all the kids, but a lot of them, a lot of kids. So why is it happening? That's the next question. I know we talk about it in the book at length, if we're being honest. But let's just elaborate.
Yeah, but it is important to make it very clear and outline why this is happening. And there were a number of different reasons, a number of reasons that kind of run into another reason that's based on that reason, etc., etc. But first and foremost, again, let's just recheck what we're talking about here. We're talking about coaches overcomplicating it during the early stages of development. So when kids are young, primarily between 6 and 14, and we're not just talking like at rec level, we're talking at self-proclaimed leading clubs, clubs that will advertise how knowledgeable their coaches are. And again, a lot of these coaches are A licensed, B licensed coaches. They've got the diplomas. They've been through the process. They're advertising that. And now they get on the platform, where they're in front of everyone. As you know, many parents will watch the practice, and all the parents are on the side. Now, here we go.
Yeah.
My chance now to show everybody what I know.
Yeah.
So the kids' experience, if you like, what really is going to help the kids is hijacked because they want to put the show on
because
for
of
their ego.
Because of the coach's ego, they want to take centre stage. They want to justify, their existence, and they do this often quite loudly and in a quite commanding style. We see this all the time.
Yeah.
And not only that, an important point is, not only do the coaches often have the ego, which is a massive issue, but as we talk about in the book, you get a lot of parents who, again, we could relate this to the dark room syndrome. A lot of parents just don't know, but they actually demand it, and they actually think that that's good coaching if the coach is being highly vocal, commanding, pointing, directing, intervening constantly all the time.
Overly informative.
Yeah, so what this does is the coaches, they charge, as we spoke about, very high fees at these self-proclaimed leading clubs. The parents are paying these fees. They want a return on this investment.
Yeah.
Well, I want my coach to be, showing that he's a technical expert and he's got his A license, and I want him stopping the session.
Yeah.
I want him jumping in every time a player makes a mistake to correct that mistake.
Yeah.
Even though that's not the best thing for development, but the parents. So we've got the ego, and then we've now got a situation where a lot of, ill-informed parents, for the most part, they actually want that because they think that's what constitutes good coaching.
And as we'll talk about in a short while here, in a couple of minutes, that's exactly what they don't want. But now let's just keep talking about why it's happening. Another reason why this is happening is because of the need and demand for short-term success.
Yeah.
Now what I mean by that is, let's think about it. If I take a group of young players who are 10 and 11 years old, and my objective, even though it might be hidden or it might not be on the website, because I've got to declare that player development is our primary objective. If the objective really is to go and win tournaments and do well as a team, then all of a sudden we get the situation where the team success comes before individual player development.
Yeah.
So the reason why these patterns of play, formations, working on corner kicks, getting into complex tactical analysis, anchoring kids in positions, and you're the defence, and this is how you're going to operate, and all the rest of it. During practices where kids, we'll talk about what they should be doing in a minute. That's happening so that they can get ready for the big game, so they can get ready for the tournament, so they can go and be successful, so they can win the trophies, so they can put the trophies on the website, and and it just carries on from there.
Absolutely, and it's just this thing that we talk about it a lot, don't we? The schools we go to, the parents we visit, the team is just pushed constantly ahead of the individual, and it's counterintuitive in a way, but it has to be about the kid. It has to be about the kid being ready for a certain environment, a certain level of challenge. Then we can look at constructing rosters and constructing teams. And again, this is something we talk about in the book. So, all right, we've spoken about what is happening briefly. We speak about a couple of the reasons why it's happening. And so what should be happening?
And so basically what should be happening is the fact that young players who come into a program where the claim is to improve player development, to focus on improving your skills, your decision making, making you an all-round player, those players first of all should not be subjected to that. Those players should in fact be subjected to long spells of activities. And what type of activities are we talking about?
Well, I mean, in that, I just want to just take it back a little bit. In answer to that question, what should we be seeing? It can be answered really in two parts, two elements.
Okay.
So, the first component of that are the training. What type of training activities should the kids be doing? So, instead of doing isolated, static, rigid, boring, complicated routines, we should be looking at activities that engage them constantly with the ball, small-sided activities, 2v1, 1v1, 3v2, 3v3, 4v4. And it's interesting, I just have to highlight this point. We, obviously visited a lot of academies in Europe, including, Man United, and we went to Liverpool a couple of years ago. And it was really interesting speaking to these guys about, they basically tag it as playing form activity. And a lot of research has been highlighted on playing form. So what do we mean by playing form activity? What we mean is the activities that incorporate decision making, anticipation, spatial awareness, and they're just games, small-sided games where they're tackling, they're defending, they're shooting, they're making decisions, they're crossing the ball, they're heading it.
Being creative.
They're being creative, and they don't have to. Even in what was interesting, even in the warm-up routines and stuff like that, you can still incorporate these, demands of the game, spatial awareness, perception of time and space, things like that, decision making. So even though it might not be a small-sided game per se, whatever activity you guys are doing, they should be incorporating these elements of decision making, anticipation, awareness. That's what young players should be doing all the time. Technical development, the decision making, but most important is retention, and they're going to love it. They're going to love it. We're going to ignite their passion for the sport. That's the first component of what I would say with that.
And just to add, because I know you're going to talk about the other component. I mean, the fact is, when you look back at, when you were growing up as a player, and you look back at 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, I can remember loving playing in small-sided activity all the time. And again, this is not just my take on it or your take on it. Go and do your homework. Anyone can go and ask. Go and ask players what they would rather be doing. Would they, at 11 years old, would they rather be stood in a training session where they're waiting for tactical information and they stood around and the coach is talking and it's 20 minutes and it's, all right, now I can get to touch the ball a little bit and do something, or do I have to wait, or would they rather be involved in the activities that you just talked about?
We can ask the players, and that will certainly give us a massive indicator. But we can also look at the research that's been produced by professors and developmental experts. It's the same in basketball. It's the same in a lot of sports. The kids who ultimately maintain their long-term development and gave themselves a better chance of achieving whatever their goal was,
unlocking their potential,
were involved in this playing form activity from the ages of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. A lot of the time in the street, in the backyard, in the garden, at school. So it's no coincidence that these guys reached a certain level because it's the decision-making element of the game, constantly engaged in that, constantly engaged with the ball at their feet. So we've got to be mindful of this evidence.
Now, what's the other part? Because I know you want to talk about the coaches.
We could go on and on. Yeah, the second element to the question, what should we be seeing? So we've spoken about coaches stepping in constantly whenever a player makes a mistake. They need to correct it. They need to be vocal. They need to, highlight what they know to the parents and the onlookers. What we should be seeing is actually the opposite of that. Yeah. We should be seeing, coaches just being a facilitator of the learning environment, setting things up, as we talk about when we go around doing the workshops, setting things up, small-sided activities. You can do stations, you can do it however you want, and then just let the players get on with it. Let them solve the problems, let them, be creative, let them enjoy it. And if a player makes a mistake, which of course you're going to see numerous times in the sessions, can you speak to them at the drinks break? Can you speak to them just as they're waiting for their turn or whatever? Hey, what could you have done in that situation? No problem. Instead of stepping in, constantly stepping in, stopping it and halting it. That's what we should be seeing. It's interesting because we've got a good friend back home who's a top coach and works with a lot of elite world-class athletes, and he spoke about the fact that in some practice sessions he actually just sets it up and just stands there and doesn't say a word all night, not a word. And the new parents in particular, are astounded by that. They can't believe that that's happening, and it's just basically to facilitate their learning, to fuel their passion, and just let them get on with it. Yeah, that's it with young kids.
And that point is obviously a good one, just to illustrate that it doesn't need to be complicated.
Doesn't need to be complicated.
And coaches that are complicating these training sessions and scenarios where young players are coming in, they need to be held accountable.
Yeah.
And it needs to be changed. Otherwise, there's going to be too much time wasted.
Yeah.
And kids are simply not going to unlock their potential. And they're going to be bored, and a lot of them are going to drop out of the sport because of that.
Yeah. And just a final point, what we should be seeing. I mean, you could add the fact that we should be seeing a situation where each child is being monitored in terms of their readiness and their capabilities, mentally, cognitively, technically, physically, so that they can be put in a situation that is commensurate with their needs. What we see, as we've spoken about, it's the team that comes first.
Yeah.
So because the team comes first, they are often in a situation where they are not aligned with the appropriate challenge.
Yeah.
So what we should be seeing is a coach setting up practice routines that, forget about chronological age.
Yeah.
Forget about, Johnny's 12 and Jimmy's 12, they've got to be on the same team. No, they don't. They have to be in a situation that is aligned with their capabilities at that moment in time.
Yeah.
So that's something that's massively important.
And in closure to this, I mean, obviously, this is a topic that we've talked about a lot over the years.
Yeah.
It was a good question, and we'll talk about that in a second. But it's always a case in these scenarios where it's often what the player can do for the club.
Absolutely.
And not what the club can do for the player.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's often the case with many of these scenarios.
Yeah.
How are we doing there? So anything else you want to touch on?
No, I mean, we could speak a bit longer, but I'm sure that we've covered the basic points.
Yeah. And if there are any questions regarding that, please don't hesitate. We are going to be announcing some things on our Facebook page, as you can see here. Please don't hesitate to send us your questions, because if you send us a question, we'll make it our topic. We'll come on here, we'll talk about it. You can certainly reach us on Facebook. You can also go to our website at coachingoutsidethebox.org and send us emails. You can join our mailing list so that you receive the live information and things like that. Don't hesitate to send us anything that entails your experiences or anything that you've gone through recently. Even if let's say you come home and you I don't know, something frustrated you, and you want someone to talk to, just shoot us a quick email and we will answer those questions, or make comments on what you've said in our live TV shows upcoming. We won't expose you, so don't worry if you think that we're going to say, hey, this is from Jimmy Jones from ABCFC. We won't expose you. And then additionally, on our website, you can check out our workshops. we love coming in, seeing some good people. And Paul, I know that this is one of your favourite aspects about what we do.
Yeah, it's a great platform to engage with the parents and the coaches, the volunteers. I know it's been highly productive. It's enjoyable. It's hopefully educational. And I think that a lot of people get some really good tips and good benefit from it.
So with that said, for this week, I'm Richard Shaw, this is Paul Mayers, and we are Coaching Outside the Box, and it's been a pleasure, and we'll see you next time.